The GameCube might not have been the biggest hit upon release, competing with a system that would become the best-selling home console of all time, but Nintendo certainly put their all into ensuring the Cube had the most excellent first-party software library. So in this video, we're going to be talking about titles such as Super Smash Bros. Melee and Luigi's Mansion, as well as a handful of other great GameCube titles that have interesting secrets. Our first piece of trivia comes from a title that you genuinely wouldn't expect to have many interesting facts about it at all. The Shrek video game originally launched for the Xbox, but was later reworked for the GameCube under the name Shrek Extra Large. Mr. Trick with Shrekkstra Large there, but this updated edition of the game included a new version of the game's cover, featuring more characters, including the much-loved Donkey, despite the fact that Donkey doesn't make any appearance throughout the entire game. This version of the game also includes a fairly bizarre and rarely seen edition not included in the original Xbox build, created specifically to reference the game's new release on the GameCube. If the player manages to get out of bounds and fall into the void, typically the result of a glitch, Shrek will wind up being teleported to a dimly lit area. This area is actually a pretty convincing replica of the inside of a Nintendo GameCube. The area is quite small, as you might imagine, but it's also fairly detailed for something that over 99% of players were never going to see. Once inside, all cheats become disabled and the player is unable to escape. Not only that, but even the pause menu is disabled, which means that the game is effectively soft-locked, with the only solution being the player to reset their system. Another Cube title with plenty of secrets is the snowboarding classic 1080 Avalanche. The names for several of the game's high scores in the gate challenges, time trials and one trick stage use phrases and references to various Nintendo-related things. The high score naming system allows for only 3 letters to be used, however, so these references are done across the first, second and third place for each stage. For example, the gate challenge scores for the Aspen Lake Dam Grits and Gravy stage spells out GameCube. Other scores spell out Eternal D and Metroid P, referencing the Cube exclusives Eternal Darkness and Metroid Prime. A few other scores reference Mario, spelling out Here We Go and Bowser Rules. There's also a few self-referential scores, such as this one, which means Long live Nintendo Software Technology, the game's developers. There's also this one, which stands for Nintendo Software Technology Redmond, Washington, a nod to where the studio resides. The title has another self-referential nod. After pressing start on the title screen, the game's camera swings through a cabin window to reach the menu inside. Hanging above the window is a poster featuring the Devil logo from Wave Race Blue Storm, a game which shares characters with and takes place in the same universe as 1080 Avalanche. Before we get into more GameCube facts, we'd like to take a moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. If you've ever thought about making YouTube videos yourself, you could give Skillshare a try. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of creative and easy to understand classes to help you learn essential skills. Skillshare provides unlimited access to high-quality classes about writing, video production, and even marketing. DidYouKnowGaming has previously used this service ourselves, and we can vouch for its ease of access and to-the-point nature. So if you're starting video creation and you want to learn new skills, we'd recommend Skillshare's Video Editing with Adobe Premiere for Beginners by Jordi Vanderput, which gives valuable insight on how to navigate Premiere and make your first project. Skillshare also adds new premium classes all the time and is completely ad-free, so you can focus on creation. If you'd like to try Skillshare out for free, the first 1,000 DidYouKnowGaming subscribers to join Skillshare with the link on screen or in the description will get their first month of Skillshare entirely free. So be sure to visit the link on screen or click the link in the description to get this great offer and join more than 7 million other creators learning through Skillshare. And now, back to the trivia. The GameCube's launch lineup left some players feeling a bit perturbed. Nintendo announced the lineup at E3 in 2001 with a list of games that lacked a distinctive red-hatted plumber. In his absence, brother Luigi took center stage with Luigi's Mansion, a title that was the first game many Cube owners got to play on the console, partly thanks to it being a launch title in every region, and one of only 3 launch titles when the GameCube released in Japan. The game introduced the eccentric yet iconic character Professor Egad, who has quite a few interesting secrets surrounding his name. Egad's Japanese name is Hakase Oyama, which is actually a dual reference. It functions as both a nod to Nintendo designer Yoshiyuki Oyama, who created Egad, and to an exclamation meaning, "Oh my." He can even be heard saying Oyama in the game. Oyama! This is why, when the character was localized into English, Nintendo of America opted to base EGAD's name on the exclamation EGAD. In the many European releases of Luigi's Mansion titles, localizers opted to base the character's name on puns for weird, strange, and scary, with the only real exception being his German name, Professor Egid. This is a play on the word Igitt, which means something along the lines of icky or yuck. EGAD's name was also localized into Spanish twice, once for Europe and once for the Americas. The American version calls him Professor Disaster, a pun on disaster, whereas the European release gave him the highly original name Professor Fessor. They literally called him Professor and just took some letters away. Another GameCube game featuring a beloved Mario character is Wario World, a title which had some noteworthy differences between its Japanese and international releases during the game's final boss fight against Black Jewel. In the international release, Black Jewel only releases 5 spritelings that the player must destroy, but in the Japanese game, they summon 10, making it far more challenging. In the international version, this is also the only phase of the fight, and the player must complete it 8 times. But the Japanese only had to do it 4 times and then move on to a completely exclusive Phase 2. After it loses half of its health, Black Jewel creates a shockwave within its body, makes rings of fire, and launches hundreds of treasure chests at the player. This second phase also has a new piece of Japan exclusive music. It's interesting to note that these differences are due to WarioWare being one of the rare games that was released in the West before it was released in Japan, which allowed its developers at Treasure to remove glitches and add content for the Japanese release. 2 more GameCube titles with interesting regional differences are the Sonic Compilations, Sonic Mega Collection, and Sonic Gems Collection. Both Sega Genesis games The Ooze and Comic Zone are exclusive to the Japanese version of Mega Collection, where they have to be secretly unlocked using button combinations. These titles will ultimately be made available in the Sonic Mega Collection Plus, though this re-release wasn't brought over to GameCube. Mega Collection also has traces of several unused games in its data, where a much older version of the game selection menu can be found. Among the games listed in the image, both Vector Man and Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair are present, which are not part of this collection. There's also evidence that Sonic CD was planned to be included, but was also cut. Vector Man would be included in Sonic Gems Collection, along with its sequel, all 3 Streets of Rage titles, and Bonanza Brothers. The Streets of Rage trilogy and Bonanza Brothers were stripped from the international releases, but even more games were originally planned to be included. Wonder Boy 3, Wonder Boy in Monster World 4, and Sonic Eraser, a puzzle game that was only distributed in Japan and Brazil via Sega MegaNet. These are all listed in Gem Collection's data. Now to take a look at a game with a somewhat cult following, Chibi Robo is a game that brings large-scale environments, but only because of the perspective of its lead role being a very tiny robot with a heart for cleaning this world. The game includes a huge array of references to Nintendo's past, not just with their video games, but even with their early devices. One of these references is in Kid Eggplant. This vegetable child is quite clearly a reference to Eggplant Man from the NES title Wrecking Crew, and could possibly even be the same character. Eggplant Man appeared not just in the original Wrecking Crew, but also the game's sequel, released exclusively in Japan under the name Wrecking Crew 98 for the Super Famicom. He also makes a brief appearance in one of the micro games featured in WarioWare Twisted. Nintendo clearly felt a desire to bring their history to the console, as they even included Eggplant Man as a trophy in Melee, later also appearing as a spirit in Smash Ultimate. Curiously, Eggplant Man's trophy in Super Smash Bros. Melee is actually identical to the appearance of Eggplant Kid from Chibi Robo, perhaps suggesting that they are in fact the same character and this isn't simply a homage. Probably the most popular GameCube title ever is Super Smash Bros. Melee, which, thankfully for us, has a huge volume of trivia that we've extensively covered over the years. But when you remember just how big the fanbase of the series is, it's almost no surprise that new secrets are discovered all the time, even for this 20-year-old title. Within the game's data is a ton of unused content, and there's a few tidbits we've never covered before about the game's unused audio. One example is an unused sound of the Boo's laugh from Mario 64, hidden within Melee. The sound effects file name is ST Great Bay Tickle Laugh, which means it would likely have been used for Tingle within the Great Bay stage, for some reason. Another unused clip in the game's data is that of the announcer saying Nintendo All-Star.
Nintendo All-Star!
This is the first half of the Japanese name of the original Smash on N64, which is called Nintendo All-Star Super Smash Bros. What's interesting here is that not even the Japanese release of Melee plays this voice clip. Another unused audio file comes from Ganondorf, who has a scrapped clip of him yelling. The file is titled SFXV Ganon Kirafuda, with Kirafuda meaning something close to trump card or last resort in Japanese. This was almost certainly a leftover from when Melee was planned to have Final Smash attacks, as the Japanese name for Final Smash is Saigo no Kirifuda, which roughly means final trump card. The clip would end up being used, but not in Melee, and not even in relation to a Final Smash attack like you might expect. The audio plays through the Wii remote when the player selects Ganondorf as their character in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Did you also know that Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver had unique updates to prevent leaving players stranded? Or that a hidden voice within Super Paper Mario can be heard saying, "Save us, please"? For more trivia, check out our videos on Nintendo DS and Nintendo Wii game facts. So we found out about your juice likes. Now I want to know about your movie likes. Best movie ever made? Go. You know, sometimes people say they have trouble deciding what their favorite movie is. When I said best movie ever made, what movie first came to your mind? I'll tell you mine in the next video.